There can't be extra perks beyond what that player gets in salary. And that is the argument here in the case of Kawhi Leonard.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Yasmin Vasugian. So today on the show, we got a major NBA trade that is being held up while the league investigates how the LA Clippers compensated star player Kawhi Leonard, how that could ripple through the league. Plus, why prosecutors in the Charlie Kirk shooting case are leaning into an interview with the suspect's roommate and love interest. Up first, though, President Trump pushed out all three sitting members of a key election agency. And according to a source familiar with the firings, this could throw the country into chaos ahead of the midterms. The bipartisan Election Assistance Commission, or EAC as it's called, it was set up after the 2000 election of Bush v. Gore to work with state and local officials on election security. A White House official told NBC News they're planning to replace the ousted commissioners, but the Senate is going to need to confirm any appointments, which means it's unlikely to happen anytime soon. And also, the Republicans may not even want it. So what effect could these firings have on the upcoming midterm elections? For this, I want to bring in NBC News senior national politics reporter, Jon Allen. Hey, Jon. For this, I want to bring in NBC News senior national politics reporter, Jon Allen. Hi, Jon.
Hey, Yasmin.
Okay, so let's talk about this EAC, right? Until yesterday, there were two Democrats, one Republican. The fourth member, a Republican, had actually resigned earlier on in the year. What are White House officials saying as to why they kind of dismantled this agency, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, their view is that the president should be able to have whoever he wants on these independent commissions. And we saw the Supreme Court ruling just last week, where the Supreme Court said the president does have the power outside of the Federal Reserve to fire whoever he wants from commissions like the Election Assistance Commission. So I think for people who are watching very closely that court case, it's not surprising that he is making these moves. And yet at the same time, there's a lot of frustration from those who believe in election integrity that basically you've now not got a functioning commission.
So Jane Tim, who wrote the digital piece alongside you, who did the reporting on this firing alongside you, spoke to one of the commissioners who was fired yesterday. What did they say?
They said that they were surprised. They were on a work trip, to deal with election assistance issues, and got an email around 4:00 in the afternoon from a White House aide, Morgan DeWitt Snow, saying that they had been fired from this commission. They were actually out of the airport when they found out.
Wow.
And so, look, I think, it was a surprise in terms of the exact timing. I think the writing was on the wall. I think that's why, at least probably factored into the decision of one of the previous Republican commissioners to already have resigned. The two Democrats on the commission were technically fired. Technically, the Republican on the commission, Christy McCormick, resigned, but the message went out from the White House that it was that they no longer had jobs.
So I mentioned this commission was established back in the early 2000s after Bush v. Gore. What was it initially set up to do, and what has it done since, especially during elections?
Yeah, I mean, the idea here has been for the federal government to provide assistance to state and local governments to help them with their election processes, with their machines, with the basic conduct of elections.
What does that mean? What does that mean, like in real terms?
I mean, in real terms, you're talking about basically grants to state and local governments. You're talking about technical assistance for certifying elections, the equipment that's used to certify them. Basically creating a process or creating a system through which the federal government and local governments and state governments can communicate with each other about election problems. Basically, this is an operation that has distributed $1 billion in grants over the course of the last 7 or so years. So, I mean, no small thing. I mean, these are real issues, not the type that Donald Trump talks about in terms of election integrity, but actual problems that state and local governments have run into. This is not an agency that has been, working to help one candidate or another, or one party or another. It's one literally providing technical assistance to state and local governments so that they can run their elections better.
So critics would say, Jon, that this thing is not necessary, right? And there was a bill introduced back in 2013 by Republicans to get rid of the EAC altogether. So is it necessary? I guess in your reporting and the digging that you've been doing on the EAC, the work that it's been doing as you're looking at elections and the role that it plays, is it necessary?
Well, let me tell you what Benjamin Hovland, the commissioner who spoke to Jane Tim on the phone after he was fired, said about this. He said to her, when you're asking more and more of people without giving them the necessary resources, mistakes happen. And so there's a real risk of self-fulfilling prophecies in that way. And to interpret what he's saying there, what he means is you've got a president who is constantly harping on election security, election integrity, and the idea that elections are not run well. And at the same time, he is kneecapping the agency that helps them run well. And that's the argument of those who support the Election Assistance Commission, including, as I said, Benjamin Hovland, one of the commissioners who was fired and spoke to our colleague Jane.
So in 2020, when the president and many of his supporters came out and said that the election falsely was stolen, that he had won the election, the EAC was one of the agencies that came out and said, in fact, the election was secure. How could the midterms be affected if, in fact, the EAC doesn't have any members on it?
Yeah, the landscape that we're dealing with in 2026 is so different than 2020 because in 2020, you had independent voices out there to challenge the president's narrative with facts. The president said the election had been stolen, and the Election Assistance Commission said, no, it hasn't been. The Supreme Court said, no, it hasn't been. Lower court said, no, it hasn't been. And the Justice Department, Bill Barr, then the Attorney General, said that there was no widespread election fraud, and after having investigated it. So what you're seeing now in 2026 is a Supreme Court that has enabled the president to fire the commissioners on the Election Assistance Commission, essentially neutering it. And then because it's neutered, there will not be an Election Assistance Commission that is in a position to make an independent judgment of whether the election was run smoothly or where there were problems, or even to raise a flag and say, hey, there were problems with this election if in fact there is a problem with the election. But I think the president knows full well that his arguments about past elections have been without evidence. And then, at the Justice Department, you are not likely to see a repeat of 2020 where the president said there was fraud and the Attorney General said there wasn't. It is unimaginable that Todd Blanche or anybody else that's running the Trump Justice Department will say anything other than what the president says about the conduct of elections. Otherwise, they will be out of a job, and we have seen the president's willingness to get rid of anybody who disagrees with him. So, the number of independent voices that are out there that can make a judgment has been reduced significantly.
Jon Allen, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So we are finally getting a look at how prosecutors are building their case against Tyler Robinson, the man accused of assassinating conservative activist Charlie Kirk. This week, prosecutors have entered a lot of evidence in a preliminary hearing that's going to help determine whether Robinson is going to be brought to trial, including a taped interview with Robinson's roommate and former romantic partner.
He started crying a little bit and said he wishes he hadn't done it.
So Tyler Robinson is charged with aggravated murder. So far, he has not entered a plea. So I want to turn to an expert here who's been following this thing all week. NBC News legal analyst, Misty Marris. Hi, Misty.
Hi, Yaz.
Okay, I want to talk about this trial because it's been getting a lot of attention over the last few days. Charlie Kirk, as we all know at this point, was this very well-known conservative figure, a co-founder of Turning Point USA, close ally of the president. Tyler Robinson, is accused of shooting Charlie Kirk at an event at the Utah Valley University campus. What does the prosecution have to prove in this particular hearing? And what has, in your estimation, been the strategy on their part so far?
So, yes, in Utah has an interesting criminal procedure when it comes to criminal charges. So in Utah, the case actually goes to the judge for a preliminary hearing. And at the preliminary hearing, prosecutors produce evidence to establish probable cause. And the defense has the opportunity to cross-examine witnesses and be a participant, unlike the grand jury, which is a behind-the-scenes process. So how's the prosecution doing? I think they've established probable cause on top of probable cause on top of probable cause. Yeah. When you're talking about this standard, they presented DNA evidence linking Tyler Robinson to the rifle that they say is the murder weapon, to a towel that was wrapped around that rifle, to a screwdriver that was found at the scene. And they have video, about 16 hours of video. We haven't seen all of that, but that's what prosecutors say exists, which show either Tyler Robinson or the vehicle he was driving. And that's putting together a timeline for prosecutors that give him opportunity to commit the crime. So prosecutors have laid this all out. That critical interview that was done by law enforcement of Lance Twiggs, his former romantic partner and roommate, that has been a central piece of this case. So you really can see the foreshadowing of what the trial would look like if and when this case goes.
So there was text messages that were submitted that happened between Tyler Robinson and Lance Twiggs. And then there was parts of this interview that really stood out. And there was a conversation at one point in which Lance Twiggs was asked, did he, i.e. Tyler Robinson, talk about what he had done?
And did he talk about what he had done?
Didn't go into detail. I just asked him in person if what he said was true the night before, and he said it was. I started crying a little bit and said he wishes he hadn't done it, and then kept going around and just doing stuff, I think, to keep himself busy or distracted or something.
What stands out to you, Misty, about this moment?
This was a really, really important and pivotal moment for prosecutors. And the reason why Lance Twiggs is such a central figure for the prosecution's case, and you know if they're giving immunity to anybody that there's a reason for it, right? Because a lot of other evidence, like the DNA matches or the rifle, when push comes to shove, you're going to have experts going back and forth about that. So the question is, what did we learn from Tyler Robinson in communications that he had with somebody who is presumably a trusted confidant? So what prosecutors laid out was a whole bunch of text messages, some we had seen before, which prosecutors say is Tyler Robinson confessing in these text messages with Lance Twiggs. Now, a clever defense attorney is going to say, well, did you ever actually see Tyler Robinson send that text, or did you just receive it from his phone? Do you really know who sent it? But then you have this interview, which really supplements that the next day you have Lance Twiggs and Tyler Robinson having a conversation. So that is really important for prosecutors when you're talking about putting together all of the pieces of this case.
There's another part of Lance Twiggs' interview that could actually work for the defense, and that is, it seems to me, that is the question on whether or not they had discussed, for instance, LGBTQ issues and gender identity. That, it seems, could also play into the defense's hands, considering Lance Twiggs as a response to that.
So did you ever talk about gender identity issues and LGBTQ rights?
No, not really. Usually if he did talk about politics stuff, it was relating to Trump or current policies being issued or voted on, I think.
Why do you think this could play for the defense?
So something prosecutors are seeking in this case as part of the charges is what's called a targeted victim enhancement. What does that mean? It means that the victim in this case, who is Charlie Kirk, was targeted for a reason unique to him. Here, the argument is for political, religious beliefs. Some of what has come into this preliminary hearing, which we have actually not seen with our own eyes, is a 4-paragraph statement by David Engelhardt. David Engelhardt was a board member at Turning Point USA. Defense fought hard to keep this out. What is it? Well, it is a 4-paragraph statement about what Turning Point USA is, what its position is on politics, what its position is on religion, maybe what its position is on LGBTQ community. All of that is being used by prosecutors to say that Tyler Robinson targeted Charlie Kirk specifically because of those views. So this question posed to Lance Twiggs, well, did Tyler Robinson ever talk about this stuff with you? Was he talking about LGBTQ rights? Doesn't necessarily fit with that narrative. So That could be used by the defense because right now they're establishing whether or not there's enough evidence to satisfy probable cause with respect to this enhancement. But down the road, rest assured, we now see what the prosecutors are going to present in a trial as far as motive.
So two notable folks were in the courtroom throughout this hearing: Erica Kirk, Charlie Kirk's widow, and Don Trump Jr., the president's son and a good friend of Charlie Kirk's. What does their presence do to this hearing, if anything? How does it affect it, if anything? Have we heard from them at all? And then what comes next?
So we did hear from Donald Trump Jr. He did a media interview and he talked about how the evidence was very overwhelming and the case was actually much stronger than he even anticipated sitting in the preliminary hearing. Erica Kirk, and through her attorneys, has made a lot of arguments in the courtroom about transparency, wanting more of what is being submitted to the court to be viewed by the public. And her lawyers have made arguments about how the nature of this case, how there's so many eyes on it and the public has the right to know the real facts as opposed to all the conjecture that's going on outside. So prosecutors wanted to do closing arguments right away. The defense asked to actually brief everything, brief the evidence, brief the legal issues. The judge said yes to the defense. And now closing arguments, these briefs will be submitted and closing arguments are scheduled for September 1st. Yes, so we're not going to get a result anytime soon. I think that's indicative of the high-profile nature of this case. That's not the normal process. So the judge is being extra careful here to make sure the defense gets all those protections that it is requesting.
Misty Marris, thank you.
Thank you.
So it's the NBA offseason, which means it's trading time. Everyone's getting traded left and right. You have got Boston Celtics star Jaylen Brown moving to Philly to join the 76ers. Then you got John Morant leaving the Memphis Grizzlies and heading to the Portland Trail Blazers. But one of the biggest trades of this season just got put on pause. LA Clippers small forward Kawhi Leonard was supposed to be traded to the Toronto Raptors, but the teams announced on Thursday they're just going to take a little bit of a beat while there's this NBA investigation into Kawhi Leonard's compensation. So for more on this, I want to bring in NBA Sports lead basketball writer, Kurt Helin. Hey, Kurt.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Good to have you. What's going on here? Why did they decide to put this trade on hold?
Well, this was really ultimately a decision by Toronto because the league told them, hey, if Kawhi is punished from this investigation into salary cap circumvention by the Clippers to funnel more money to Kawhi, if he faces a punishment and you trade for him and he's, say, hypothetically suspended for half the season, that's on you now. And Toronto's bevy of lawyers approving this trade kind of said, no, I think we're going to take a beat and wait to see what the punishment is before we go forward with this trade.
So, Kurt, for those that haven't been following this thing, right, why is it that they have been investigating the Clippers, Kawhi Leonard, Steve Ballmer, the owner of the Clippers, and how much money Kawhi's been making?
The NBA, but every sports league around the world has a salary cap, salary structure of some kind set up to guide player salaries. Especially in American sports, you can't go outside that and pay a player extra. There can't be extra perks beyond what that player gets in salary. And that is the argument here in the case of Kawhi Leonard. The allegation is that the Clippers used one of their sponsors, a company called Aspiration, that's a green bank, to set up a no-show endorsement contract, like a $50 million endorsement contract that he didn't do anything for. There's no evidence Kawhi Leonard did anything for Aspiration, yet he got the money. And this was a way to get around that salary structure with a partner of the team.
So if I understand you correctly, essentially they said, okay, Kawhi Leonard, we're going to pay you this much money. And then we're going to funnel an extra 40 to 50 million. These are all allegations through this other company that you don't have to do anything for to get you some more money and get around this salary cap within the NBA. But again, important to note here that Steve Ballmer, the owner of the Clippers, along with Kawhi Leonard, they've denied any wrongdoing. They say they're the victims of a fraud initiated by the founder of Aspiration, Joe Sandberg.
Correct.
So with that in mind, the salary cap thing is kind of a huge consideration during this trading season and this offseason. Are there implications for the NBA at large, depending on what happens here?
Oh, absolutely. If this is found that Ballmer tried to circumvent the cap this way, the league has to come down incredibly hard, because you can't allow this precedent to be set. You can't allow, look, Steve Ballmer is the richest NBA owner, but if you're an NBA owner, you were a billionaire. So there is a sense that if that is the case, the league has to make the punishment so onerous that no other owner would dare go down this road. If that's what they find, expect them to come really hard on the Clippers, because they cannot allow this precedent to be set. It can't be, and that means a lot more than a financial fine, because I don't know what financial fine you can give Steve Ballmer that makes him blink.
It's interesting stuff, I gotta say. Who knew? The saga of the NBA trade season. Kurt Helin, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
All right, that is going to do it for us at Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Yasmin Vasugian. We'll be back on Monday with whatever the weekend may bring. And if you like what you heard and you saw, press the subscribe button. We'll see you on Monday.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app, or watch live on our YouTube channel.